Hello and welcome to D&D Debate, although the name is of course subject to change. Hello George, how are you doing?
Hi Jasper, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Ready to debate some D&D?
I am. What's our topic for today?
What is our topic for today? Well, our topic for today is it okay for players / DMs to fudge rolls? It's a very contentious issue in the D&D community. How are we going to decide who goes first?
Well, I suggest a classic Dungeons and Dragons thing where you roll a d20.
I think that sounds tremendous. Odds or evens? What are you on?
Odds?
Okay, I'll go evens.
Alright.
Didn't really have a choice though, did I? Alright, you roll.
That's evens.
Alright, so you want to go first? Or you want me to
Sure.
go first?
I mean, you were evens, so you get to decide, isn't it?
I was evens. I'm going to go first. My short-term memory has been disrupted somewhat by lockdown,
Yes.
including my long-term memory and my ability to speak. So a long debate session is really what I need right now. My opening statement is basically firstly, the issue, I think we should break it down into two halves, because DMs and players are two very, very different kind of arguments, two very, very different energies. And I'm sure we both agree that the argument for a DM to fudge a roll is more obvious than a one for a player.
Yes.
So my first point is basically the DM is the god of the world. He is the arch storyteller, and fudging the rolls are simply a tool that they can use in his or her arsenal to tell the story in the best way. Never being able to do this would be at best detracting from some potentially good moments, and at worst can completely derail a campaign or a story instance in a way which is not beneficial to the player or to the DM. Let me give you my first example, and then you can retaliate with your dissection of my words. So an example for an example. The players encounter a group of enemies who have been built up for the entire game. And the DM starts the encounter and just can't roll for shit. Gets, this amazing, awesome battle that the DM has put hours and hours into, and the players have, spent equal amounts of time preparing and figuring out the best ways of approaching it, learning about the big evil. They've spent the last 5 hours in this dungeon fighting their way through like really difficult enemies and figuring out these tactics, and then they get to the boss and it's just a beatdown. Without the DM having the ability to at least a degree bump up the damage or the AC checks of the enemy, how is that, this potentially fun, potentially incredible encounter is entirely ruined. And that is why I think a DM should be able to influence the story through the fudging of rolls.
Interesting statement. Me, personally, I believe that the fudging of rolls should not be done by a DM and just have them play out in the way as the dice demand. Yes, your statement with going on a great encounter and encountering this great foe after hours of combat and traversing dungeons and lots of time on the DM's behalf, coming up with this big bad boss. But sometimes, characters have off days, and so do enemies. Sometimes they might have other things going on in their lives, and the dice are what, define that. And I believe that, yes, at times it feels like you should be like giving these bosses maybe the extra boost, but at the same time I feel like that kind of cheats the player a little.
I mean, I would say that whilst it is to a degree kind of cheating the player, you're kind of doing it as the DM, you're doing it with the best interests of the player at heart. So you're doing it because the encounter isn't being as fun as it could be. It might still be, fun, but not as fun as it could be were the boss to be more deadly, or in some cases weaker. If it's rolling nat 20s every time and just down player, down player, down player, that's not always as fun as well. So, you know, that I think that you should at least have the option.
I can understand that. In a personal experience, not long ago, I threw my players into an encounter with a lot of gnolls. You being one of my players know this encounter.
Vietnam flashbacks. No.
So, Null flashback, yeah.
Non-flashback.
So one of our players, called Heck, his character was, you know, in the midst of this fight, and I ended up hitting him repeatedly with these attacks. And as a DM, I felt, you know, bad. You know, I was like, I don't want this person to just die in this way, you know, away from his friends. You know, everyone's retreating. He hasn't had the opportunity to escape. And I felt bad about killing his character, but at the same time, it created a lot of development with the other characters. Like, they all, in the moments of retreat, they had that moment of clarity that, oh, we are not immortal heroes. Because up until then, they haven't really had any sort of big failure. And they all had this moment of mourning. You know, the bard ended up like taking some time to write a tribute. People closer, like companions, you know, were met with frustration and anger, and others who, you know, spent time with this character working out, like, because they were barbarian and strength-based classes, and they had this realization that they're missing that workout buddy, and that's character development, and that's all because, you know, the dice willed it.
Very true. Very true. Yes. I'm never going to argue that changing the basis of D&D, which is, of course, the randomness, the spontaneity that dice provide, would be good, because D&D is inherently a very random game, much as life is a very random game. Mm-hmm. But without the kind of ability to mitigate that randomness to a degree, which kind of filters into my second point, you bastard, you're ruining my list. Having some ability to control and mitigate randomness isn't necessarily a bad thing. To my kind of second point, actually, to my second half of my first point, a little bit sneakily, the same principles that I just argued in my initial statement actually apply for players' fudging rolls. In the case that there is a moment that would be heightened by a slight shift in a roll. Like a barbarian just watched their sister murdered in front of them, captured by the baddie 5 years ago, they just found them and watched them die. The player begins this amazing description of how their eyes glaze over with vengeance, and they raise the hammer up and smash it down on the creature's head. And then they miss by like 1 AC. And probably if it's the end of a battle, you kind of know vaguely where the AC is. So you could be like, oh, I'm only going to add 1 to it. And then you have this beautiful moment where he avenges his sister after such a long time, instead of the shitty little rogue next to him immediately killing him with a sneak attack, because rogues are the worst and I love them and they're my favorite class. Basically, in both the example of the DM and the player, a small change can assist with creating a really epic moment, which would have been lost otherwise.
I can agree to that. For a player, the moment of, you know, getting something done that they've wanted to achieve for a long time is partially why they play the game. But I do feel like there are moments where, yes, you could get that 1 extra, you know, AC, you know, 1 extra damage to beat the AC, but maybe that's the opportunity, the DM knowing the situation, to be like, okay, because of this moment of like rage and frustration towards this character, maybe the DM turns to the player and goes, you can have this extra boost, so you don't get that the player fudging the roll, because I feel like if a player fudges a roll, you lose that sense of trust. Because I've had a situation in the past where I had a player fudge a number of rolls, and it made me feel sad, and I was like, okay, come back next session, we'll try and play through it. But there was that sense of, can I really trust any roll that he says to me? Because, his intentions were good. A guy was dying and he needed to roll a medicine check. And so the intentions were good, but at the same time, it takes away from the story and it takes away from the game. And I feel like that a player going, oh, I rolled a nat 1 in reality, but then he goes to the DM, yeah, that was a 18. So yeah, I had this lizard folk cavalier. He was supposed to be a great hunter. He would traverse the land, slay beasts. At least that's what I wrote in his backstory. And when it came to meeting, his party and all the people he would spend the next couple of sessions with, I wanted to have a badass entrance, and I had him jump off something, and I wanted him to land really cool. Ended up completely failing that roll, and he just fell down like an idiot. And then we went into combat, and he's supposed to be this great warrior who rides on the back of a giant lizard, and due to unfortunate rolls, his mount ended up being killed, and he looked like a complete fool in front of the people he was trying to impress. But then, more and more sessions went by. Some were good, some were bad, in the sense of that he failed significantly amount of times. But then we reached that session where we're in an underground cave and we're fighting against these creatures called Nyogi. And we go on one of our other players has a horse, and they're like, buddy, jump on the back of my horse. We're going to charge in there, full cavalry. And we just do. And I roll amazingly. And the moment just feels epic because of it.
And it wouldn't feel as good were you to have fudged it initially.
Precisely.
Yes. To a degree, having that difficulty will allow you to, feel more accomplishment when you actually resort to... when you feel more accomplishment when you resort to fudging a roll. However, in the case that you do fudge a roll, it'll be a moment and you'll feel a little bit shitty about it. I feel a little bit bad about it. But, it's one moment and then you get over it. And as long as you're not doing it every single time, I think that it won't detract a huge amount from your actual enjoyment of the game.
I can get that, but when you do it that one time, what's to stop you from going, maybe just another time, and another, to the point where, are you really playing Dungeons and Dragons, or are you just playing a game where you're filled with success?
Yeah. But maybe a player has, and this is kind of my third point, so I'm real going out of order here. But basically, what if a player's had a bad day? They've had a bad day, they've come home, and they're really looking forward to D&D. And maybe it's not some big final boss. Maybe they're just going round a festival in the city, and they are, just doing little games around the town, gaining 2 or 3 gold a pop. And they will have they will enjoy the fun and praise that comes with rolling well. And so they just say, you know what, today I'm just going to give myself a little boost here and there. And they have more fun. They have more fun in that small little way. They have more fun that session.
Yeah. So if it's a small session, like if it's nothing grand and epic and it's just simple little like games in a festival, I guess that the fudging of roles there would be acceptable. It's not.
Aha! I got you.
It's not game breaking. I think that's what's key. Because in my opinion, in a dungeon, fudging a roll to be like, oh, we just needed to solve the puzzle and get through a doorway and avoid some traps. I think that's very different to winning 5 gold in a card game or throwing sandbags into a hoop.
Yeah.
And especially if a player, because real life can affect a Dungeons and Dragons game significantly. I had a player who had some terrible things happen in their life that day, and when they came to my session, me knowing that, I made some slight alterations so that I could make them feel good about themselves, you know? They had this quest that they were on, so I threw them, you know, what you call? I've forgotten the word. Say again?
Do you give them advantage then or something?
No, it was like throwing them a small gift, you know? I gave them this like little thing to go, hey, this is here. This is something you're working towards. Here's a little taste of what you're going for. And that gave them the like, oh, I'm making progress. It's all going well now. No.
But that isn't fudging rolls.
No, it's not. But I feel like sometimes in cases where you want to fudge rolls, there's an alternative that you as a player or a DM can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So, do you want me to bring up my next point?
Yes, go for it.
So, to my next point, is kind of a bit less subjective. Randomness is fun, right?
Yes, it is.
To a point. Mm-hmm. The DM is telling a story, the DM is controlling NPCs and everything else. Therefore, it is entirely their prerogative. That's not the word I meant. It is entirely their direction, their choice of the DM whether or not to fudge a roll, especially if they use some tact and the players never even know it's happening. You know, if a DM is any good, they could fudge every roll. This is kind of my logical conclusion argument. They could fudge every single roll in the entire campaign. Never, they basically roll the dice and pretend every single time. That is and the players therefore could have an incredible game. You know, would you not agree that would be the case were it to happen?
In a perfect world, something like that.
With a perfect DM. Matt Mercer.
Matt Mercer. We love him.
We love Matt Mercer.
We love Matt Mercer. But even in his games, you do see moments of dice not being fudged. Like, for example, someone gave a really carousing speech and then he rolled really poorly. But I do, in a perfect world where you can have a DM match up every single roll appropriately to have some successes and some failures, I feel like, yes, at that point, I feel like at that point it's not Dungeons and Dragons. At that point, it's a role-playing game where instead of the players and the DM playing a game, it's the players playing a game while the DM tries to tell a story.
But is that not what DM is? Like DMing is? It's telling the story.
It is, but it's also about the DM playing the game with the players. I mean, personally, yes, there are people out there who love just the story aspect. But me as a DM, I love playing the monsters and the NPCs and having them roll specifically. For example, we have a drunk guy in the party, an NPC. He's basically like the carriage driver. Really shouldn't be behind the wagon, but he is.
Yeah, it's a very strange person. It's a weird creation of yours.
Yes, and I have him roll dice just like everyone else. I have a stat block for him, and if someone lies to him, I have him roll insight. You as the party came back one day going, oh, we totally told you that we were going out. In reality, you guys were utilizing the fact that he was always blackout drunk to lie to him. And I had him roll for it, and he went, you know what, you're probably right. I was probably blackout drunk when you told me.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's me as the DM going, oh, I want to see how this plays. I want to roll the dice and have that feeling of, oh, okay, he doesn't find out. Or, okay, he does find out, but how does he react to it? Does he go, well, I kind of feel bad that this party is now having to lie to me to make me almost feel good, kind of, you know, don't make me feel as bad because of my drinking habits.
So randomness makes story, yes, but if all the players are complying with randomness, there are still 4 or 5 random elements. So that's kind of a counter to the point you just made. It's quite fortuitous, actually. So yeah, I mean, like if you have 4 players rolling dice, then you're still playing D&D, but you've got the kind of arc pillar in the center that's kind of the DM. It's keeping everything spinning around, keeping everything working. And I mean, we probably both, you know, as DMs, we both run pretty solid campaigns. Like, we both know how to deal with things. We both plan enough so that if things go wrong, or if players do certain things, they're still fine.
Yeah.
But in the case of a less experienced DM, someone who hasn't prepared properly, someone who isn't as kind of well versed with the effects of randomness, take a first-time DM, for instance, the ability to just say, oh no, I've messed up, let me quickly just fix this, bam. That's now, he failed the dexterity save, and the enemy that I put in front of them was too strong, and now he's taken the full fireball damage, or whatever. Yeah. A weird thought just popped into my head, actually. Wouldn't it be cool to play a campaign where everyone always did max damage? Like a one-shot?
Oh, Lord.
That would be so good. Everyone always hits and always does max damage. So it's...
I mean,
well,
if that's true, if we ever did a campaign like that, everyone would immediately die to the first dragon that showed up, because on average, a dragon's breath weapon does like 10d8 damage.
Okay.
And I know as players at level 8, when maybe you'll be fighting maybe an adult dragon, you just don't have the HP for that. Maybe a barbarian does, but most players, I don't think, most characters wouldn't. Spellcasters would be decimated
immediately. A rogue could probably survive it, halving it.
Uncanny dodge, yeah.
If it's an area effect. So actually, a rogue would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't be great. Maybe if they still rolled to hit, but whenever they hit, they did max damage. And if you kind of made it a low-level camp, this is not what we're talking about.
No, we're getting distracted.
Yes, shit.
This is the greatness about D&D. Things can just come to you and you play.
No, this is the benefit of having a structured format that you can input saying, hey, let's move on to the next point. So, George, do you have a main point that you want to address now?
I feel like my main point is, no situation should a player or a DM fudge a roll. In my eyes, that's it. But I do understand the urge to, and as a DM, at times, giving the player that little nugget of, okay, yeah, I'll fudge this roll, make your life a little bit easier, or maybe I'll make this a little harder for you. You know, you're being a bit cocky. You know, I'll make this just a little bit tougher. I'll make this guy crit, for example.
Yeah.
But overall, I don't think that fudging should happen.
I mean, personally, I think that whilst I agree with pretty much everything you said, I think that without the ability and without the option to, a DM is disadvantaged in their ability to react to certain situations that require these kind of things. And therefore, I'd say that a DM should always be able to fudge a roll. And for a player, I think that newer players never, right? Because if you start doing it when you've just started playing, you'll never have fun. You'll never really get the true D&D experience. But someone who's got a bit of tact, someone who knows Dungeons and Dragons, someone who understands the way to play, sure, now or then, as long as it's not all the time, and as long as you don't let other people know about it as well. Because once a DM knows a player is fudging, you can kind of, you'll just, and this is much worse over Discord or Zoom in this case. Where
Online.
You see the players.
Yes. So there is a player unrelated to the other player.
George, you got a lot of fucking people rolling, fudging their rolls.
I've been scarred. That's all I can say.
I've been hurt before.
So this other person, whenever we used to play in person, like face to face, their roles felt natural. Sometimes they do great, sometimes they do poorly. But ever since we started doing it online, it just seems like it's success after success after success, and it does make me question them sometimes. And yeah.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up our discussion.
I think it does.
George, what do you think the best point that I made was? And I'll tell you what I thought the best point you made was.
I think the best point that you made was, as a DM, fudging rolls to make a player's experience more enjoyable at the table, especially a person who's had a bad day, or especially in a moment where it's crucial for the player to get that hit in and feel good.
I thought when you said about accomplishment, just the feeling of accomplishment that you got from your cavalier actually doing correctly, I thought that really kind of, I think probably you could see, they kind of just made me go, next point.
It made sense.
It's just true. Like there's not much you can really argue against that, I don't think. I think it sounds, so I'm very happy about that. Have I changed your mind at all towards fudging?
When it comes to DMs, a little. Never players, in my opinion.
I mean, I make this point, but to reveal my own truth, I would never do it as a player. I would never do it as a player, but 100%, I'd still do it as a DM. Rarely, because you can there are other things you can do that are better and probably more honest. So I prefer to do them, but I won't never do them. That's my take on it.
Okay.
All right. Well,
That's it.
I think that if there's nothing else, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jasper. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Jasper Banerjee. Have fun spelling that. And please listen to the Scribblers podcast, another one that I'm part of, as well as buy our magazine. The Apiary, it might be coming out next year. Who knows? Let's see with coronavirus. George, any final plugs that you want to plug?
I have 0 social media to follow.
Brilliant.
Just enjoy playing the games you play.
Very good final line. Thanks for watching.